I want freedom, not diapers, said the millionaire CEO. But 2 years later he saw them and understood and begged for her to come back. A beautiful story for my amazing family. God bless you all. Don't forget to like and comment. I'm here and ready. Let's begin with love. The words came out broken, as if Dewald Freeman's throat was fighting against his mouth, trying to stop the sentence that would destroy everything. His hands shook as he poured himself another scotch. The third since Stella Margaret had spoken the word triplets. And she watched him war with himself in real time. Watched the man she loved battle, the man he thought he needed to be. Say something else, Stella whispered, standing in the center of his penthouse while November rain attacked the windows. Say anything else. Say you're scared. Say you need time. Say you don't know how to be a father. But don't say you choose freedom over our children. Dewald's face was a masterpiece of agony, tears he wouldn't let fall pooling in his green eyes. He looked at her with the expression of a drowning man who could see the life-preserver, but couldn't make himself reach for it. I can't, Stella. God help me, I can't. Every time I try to picture myself with children, I see my father. There it was, the wound he'd never let her fully examine. His father. The man who'd chosen his law firm over family, who'd missed every birthday and graduation, who'd died at his desk reviewing contracts while his son waited for a call that never came. She moved toward him, but he held up a trembling hand to stop her. You don't understand, he continued, his voice raw. I feel it already, the resentment building. 3 babies, Stella. 3. The crying, the neediness, the complete annihilation of everything I've built. I can feel myself already starting to hate them for existing, and they're not even born yet. What kind of monster feels that way? The frightened one, she said gently, though her heart was shattering. But fear can be overcome. We can do this together. No, he moved to his desk. That barrier between them, and she saw him physically pulling himself together, transforming his fear into something colder, because cold was easier than vulnerable. I know myself. I know my limitations. I'll become him, my father, and those children will grow up the way I did, wondering why Daddy loved work more than them. Better to be honest now. He opened his checkbook with hands that still shook, though he tried to hide it. The pen wavered as he wrote, and she could see him pressing too hard, as if forcing himself through each number. When he tore the check from the book, the sound was violent in the quiet room. This is enough for everything, he said, sliding it across the glass. The best doctors, the best schools, a house wherever you want. They'll have everything, except their father. They'll have better. A father who walks away before he can damage them. His voice cracked on damage, and for a moment his mask slipped completely. She saw terror there, raw and absolute, the terror of a man who genuinely believed he was poison. You're not your father, Dewald. Aren't I? He laughed bitterly. I'm already calculating how much this will cost me, already resenting the disruption, already choosing my company over them. The only difference is I'm doing it before they're born, instead of after. That's the fear talking, not you. The fear is me. He turned to the window and she could see his reflection. Tears finally falling now that he wasn't facing her. I love you, Stella. God knows I love you. And maybe I could even love them. But love isn't enough when you're fundamentally broken. Love doesn't fix the part of me that's missing. The part that should want to be a father, but doesn't. She picked up the check, looked at the amount that should have seemed generous, but felt like the price of 3 souls. So this is it? 3 years, and it ends with a check? It ends with me being honest about who I am. He was crying openly now, his reflection a ghost in the glass. I'm a coward. I'm selfish. I'm terrified, and I'd rather live with the guilt of abandoning them than the reality of failing them every day for the rest of their lives. They're not even born yet. How can you be so sure you'll fail? Because I'm already failing. He turned back to her and his face was destroyed. Because my first thought when you said triplets wasn't joy or wonder or even normal fear. It was exit strategies. It was calculating losses. It was wondering how fast I could run. What kind of father thinks that way? One who could change if he tried. No, The word was final, though she could see what it cost him. My assistant will help you relocate. The locks will be changed by morning. I'm leaving for Tokyo tomorrow. 6 months of merger negotiations. By the time I return, this will be resolved. Resolved? She laughed, wild and bitter. Our children aren't a problem to be resolved, Duwald. To me, they are. He was rebuilding his walls now, brick by brick, becoming the cold corporate machine because it was easier than being human. And that's exactly why I should never be their father. She walked to the door, each step feeling impossible. At the threshold, she turned back. He stood at his window, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A man who had just performed surgery on himself without anesthesia, cutting away the future he was too broken to claim. You're wrong about one thing, she said quietly. You could have been a wonderful father. Not perfect, but wonderful. The fact that you're so afraid of failing them proves you're nothing like your father. He never worried about failing you. He just did. She left him there, crying in his tower, and as the elevator descended, she pressed her hands against her stomach. Your father loves you, she whispered to the 3 lives within. He just loves you so brokenly that he thinks leaving is kindness. Someday, maybe, he'll realize that broken love is still better than none at all. The check in her pocket felt like weight from another universe. She wouldn't cash it unless death demanded it, unless these 3 hearts needed it to keep beating. Behind her, 40 floors up, Duwald Freeman stood at his window, already haunted by the ghosts of children he'd never meet, already being devoured by the freedom he'd chosen over family, already discovering that protecting others from yourself is just another kind of prison. Except you're both the guard and the prisoner, forever. Chapter 2. The Descent. The contractions started at 5 a.m. during the breakfast prep at Murphy's Diner, 8 months into a pregnancy that had transformed Stella Margaret from a charity gala organizer into someone who calculated tips while her body housed 3 lives. She gripped the industrial coffee maker as pain rolled through her, watching her reflection distort in its chrome surface. The woman staring back was unrecognizable, swollen and exhausted, abandoned but not broken. Not yet, she whispered to the babies. Please, just 2 more weeks. Let me save just a little more, but her body had other plans. By 7 a.m., when the morning rush started, she was timing contractions while pouring coffee, smiling at customers through waves of agony that suggested these children had inherited their father's determination to control timing. Stella, honey, you're in labor, Miranda said, not asking but stating, already untying Stella's apron. How far apart? 8 minutes. She gripped the counter as another wave hit. But I need this shift. Rent's due tomorrow and... Her water broke mid-sentence, a dramatic rupture that silenced the entire diner. She stood in the puddle of amniotic fluid, calculating how much this would cost in lost wages, and started to cry from frustration rather than pain. I'll cover your shift, Miranda said firmly. Josie will drive you. I can take the... But the hell you will! The ride to the hospital was a blur of breathing exercises learned from YouTube, because prenatal classes cost money she didn't have. Josie, 19 and terrified, kept asking if she should call someone. There's no one to call, Stella managed between contractions that were speeding up, ignoring the recommended timeline, as if these babies knew they needed to arrive before their mother collapsed entirely. The public hospital emergency room was chaos. Gunshot wounds and heart attacks got priority over labor, even triplet labor. She sat in a plastic chair for an hour, timing contractions that were now 4 minutes apart, watching the clock and wondering if she'd give birth right there between the vending machines and the mounted television playing soap operas. When they finally admitted her, the nurse's eyes widened at her chart. Triplets. Where's your OB? I've been seeing whoever's available at the clinic. The father. There is no father. The lie was easier than the truth. Easier than explaining that their father was probably closing deals in Tokyo, having successfully erased them from his life except for the dreams he'd never admit to having. The nightmares where three faces he'd never see asked why Daddy didn't want them. Dr. Martinez appeared like a general surveying a battlefield. 34 weeks is early but manageable. You're fully dilated. These babies aren't waiting. The delivery room became a symphony of organized chaos. Gwen arrived first, screaming her fury at the world that dared to evict her early. The nurses laughed at her fierce cries, not knowing she was already protesting abandonment, already fighting. Helen followed 20 minutes later, quieter but alert, her eyes opening immediately to study this bright, cold world she'd been forced into. 2 healthy girls, someone announced. But Stella was already screaming because Adwin was coming wrong. Everything was wrong. The monitors were screaming, and so was she. Cord-wrapped baby in distress, heart rate dropping. The room exploded with movement, with urgency, with the kind of controlled panic that meant death was in the room, waiting to claim the smallest, the most vulnerable. Stella pushed with strength that came from somewhere beyond her body, from the same place that had kept her upright through 8 months of double shifts and swollen feet and sleeping, sitting up because lying down made her unable to breathe. Adwin entered the world blue and silent. They whisked her away before Stella could even see her properly. Just a glimpse of tiny limbs, too still, too quiet. The NICU team worked with desperate efficiency while Stella lay there, torn open in every possible way, listening to 2 daughters cry while praying to any god that might listen for the third to join them. Minutes passed like years. The room was too quiet except for Gwen and Helen's cries and the distant sound of machines and urgent voices from where they worked on Adwin. Stella's body was being repaired by nurses, who kept glancing toward the NICU team, their faces carefully neutral. Then finally, a sound like a kitten's mew, weak but present, alive. She's stable, Dr. Martinez announced, exhaustion evident in her voice. But there are significant complications. Her heart, of course it was her heart. The cosmic joke wasn't lost on Stella, even through the fog of exhaustion and drugs. DeWald's daughter, inheriting cardiac damage of a different kind. The next days blended into a nightmare of medical terminology and impossible mathematics. The bill grew with each specialist who examined Adwin. Tetralogy of Fallot, they called it. 4 defects in one tiny heart. She would need surgery immediately, then more as she grew. If she grew, do you have insurance? The billing administrator was kind but persistent. Medicaid. That covers basic delivery. The NICU, the surgeries, the specialists. I'm afraid those aren't fully covered. We have payment plans available. The numbers she quoted might as well have been in foreign currency. More than Stella had made in her entire life. More than she could make in 10 lifetimes of carrying coffee and eggs to truckers and night shift workers. That's when she broke the promise she'd made to herself. At 3 a.m., alone in her hospital room, while machines kept Adwin alive 3 floors away, she pulled out the check she'd carried for 8 months. The paper was soft from handling, from all the time she'd considered tearing it up, burning it, sending it back covered in the blood from her torn hands after double shifts. The amount seemed smaller now, faced with medical reality. What had felt like betrayal money now looked like Adwin's only chance at survival. She endorsed it with tears falling onto the paper, each signature feeling like selling a piece of her soul. But souls, it turned out, were worthless compared to pediatric cardiac surgery. The money evaporated instantly. The first surgery consumed more than half. The rest disappeared into the endless costs of keeping 3 premature infants alive. Formula when her milk wasn't enough, diapers sized for dolls because nothing else fit. Medications with names she couldn't pronounce, and prices that made her nauseated. She brought Gwen and Helen home to her studio apartment after a week, while Adwin remained in the NICU. The space was impossibly small. 3 borrowed cribs took up the entire room, except for a narrow path to the bathroom. She slept on the floor between them, when she slept at all. Mrs. Chen from next door started appearing with food. "I made too much soup," she'd say, though Stella knew a widow's social security didn't stretch to accidentally making gallons of soup. The other waitresses from the diner took turns visiting, bringing supplies they claimed they'd bought by mistake. Wrong-sized diapers, they'd lie, handing over exactly what she needed. These small kindnesses from near strangers highlighted the vast absence of the one person who should have been there. But there was no time for bitterness, no energy for anger. Every moment was survival. Feeding two while pumping for the third, racing to the hospital between shifts to hold Adwen through procedures that made her tiny body arch in pain. 2 months later, when they finally released Adwen, she weighed less than her sisters had at birth. The surgeon explained that she'd need 2 more surgeries minimum, possibly more. The bills would continue growing, would never stop growing, just like the children themselves. That first night, with all 3 home, Stella sat in the darkness listening to them breathe, each breath a small miracle, especially Adwen's labored wheeze. She thought about Duwald, wondered if he ever woke at 3 a.m. thinking about them, if his freedom tasted like ash in his mouth, if his perfect penthouse felt like a tomb. "Your father is sick," she whispered to them, deciding on the lie she'd tell when they were old enough to ask. "Sick in his heart and his head. He loves you from far away, because being close would hurt too much. It's not true, but it's kinder than the truth." The eviction notice arrived 2 weeks later. Noise complaints, 3 crying babies in a building with paper walls, and no sympathy. 30 days to find somewhere else, to perform another miracle with empty pockets and maxed credit cards. But that night, she didn't cry. She'd run out of tears somewhere between Adwen's second code blue and her first successful feeding. Instead, she made another promise to the 3 sleeping forms. "We'll survive this. Somehow we'll survive this. And someday you'll be so happy and whole that you won't even wonder about the ghost who haunts us all. Someday, his absence won't define us anymore." Chapter 3. The Shattering Discovery. Dewald Freeman hadn't slept properly in 2 years. Every night at 3 a.m., his body woke him with the precision of an alarm, the same hour triplets would need feeding, though he tried not to think about that connection. He'd pour himself water with hands that shook from dreams he couldn't quite remember, dreams filled with cries he'd never heard and faces he'd never seen. The discovery came not through accident, but through his own weakness, his inability to stop searching for ghosts. It started with a Google alert he'd set up the day after she left, programmed to notify him of any mention of Stella Margaret online. For 2 years it had been mostly silent. Then on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, it pinged with a link to a community newsletter from Queens, a small mention in a human interest piece about single mothers. "Local hero Stella Margaret manages triplets while working doubles at Murphy's Diner," read the caption under a grainy photo that stopped his heart. The rational executive in him knew he should delete it, maintain the separation he'd orchestrated. But his hand moved without permission, clicking the link, enlarging the photo until 3 small faces filled his screen. The article was brief, just filler content about Mother's Day, but it mentioned that one of the triplets had undergone multiple surgeries for a heart condition, that the community had rallied to support them, that Stella never missed a shift despite everything. Heart condition. His daughter had a heart condition. He closed his laptop, opened it again, closed it, opened it. The photo was still there. 3 girls at a park, blurry but unmistakably his. The eldest had his exact jawline. The middle one had his mother's nose. The smallest, attached to oxygen tubing, had his eyes, that specific shade of green he'd inherited from his grandmother. For 6 hours, he sat at his desk staring at that photo, watching the sun set over Manhattan, watching his reflection overlay their faces in the darkening screen. Then, moving like a man in a dream, he drove to Queens. Murphy's Diner was exactly what he'd expected. Cracked vinyl booths, fluorescent lights that hummed, the smell of grease and coffee and exhaustion. He parked across the street, watching through windows foggy with steam. The dinner rush was in full swing. And there she was, Stella, moving between tables with practiced efficiency that couldn't hide her exhaustion. She was different, thinner but somehow stronger, like pressure had compressed her into something harder. Her smile when she served customers was real but tired, the smile of someone who'd learned to find joy in small things because large joys were extinct. He watched her work until 1 a.m., watched her count tips with the concentration of someone for whom every dollar mattered, watched her laugh with the other waitresses, even though her eyes suggested laughter was a foreign language she'd learned to speak. She left through the back door, and he followed at a distance, his Bentley obscene in these streets. She caught the night bus, rode it to a neighborhood that looked forgotten by the city, by hope, by everything except struggle. The building she entered should have been condemned. Graffiti covered every surface and half the windows were boarded. 3rd floor, no elevator. He knew because he'd counted the windows until one lit up. He hired a private investigator the next day, needing to know everything, needing to punish himself with details. The report arrived 48 hours later, dense with information that read like evidence of his crimes. Medical records detailed Adwen's condition with clinical brutality. Tetralogy of Fallot, 3 surgeries so far, at least 2 more needed. The bills were astronomical. His check, that insulting payoff, had been cashed the day before the first surgery, every penny gone to keep their daughter alive. She works 90 hours a week, the investigator noted. Days at the diner, nights cleaning offices when a neighbor watches the children. Never missed a payment on the medical plans, though she's defaulted on everything else. Credit destroyed. 2 evictions, 3 more narrowly avoided. There were photos. Stella at food banks, pride swallowed for her daughter's survival. The girls at a free clinic, Gwen holding Helen's hand, while Stella carried Adwen. Birthday parties in public parks with homemade cakes. Halloween costumes sewn from scraps. Christmas presents that were clearly from dollar stores, but wrapped with elaborate care. The children are remarkably well-adjusted, the investigator continued. Teachers report they're bright, kind, protective of each other. The oldest, Gwen, shows signs of advanced intelligence but also hypervigilance. The middle one, Helen, displays unusual empathy for her age. The youngest, despite her medical challenges, is described as cheerful and brave. There was artwork from their daycare, photographed and included. 3 different hands drawing the same scene over and over. 3 small figures, 1 tall figure and an empty space. Sometimes the empty space had a question mark. Sometimes it was filled with black scribbles. Once in Gwen's careful letters, "Daddy works far away." He drove back to Queens that night, parked outside their building, and broke completely. Not the controlled tears of a man maintaining dignity, but the complete dissolution of someone whose soul was trying to escape through his throat. He sobbed until he couldn't breathe, until his chest hurt, until he thought his heart might actually stop from the weight of what he'd done. 3 pieces of him existed 4 floors above, and he didn't know their middle names. Didn't know if they were afraid of the dark or thunder or being alone. Didn't know what songs Stella sang to them, what stories she told, what lies she crafted to explain his absence. The investigator had included financial projections. At current rates, Stella would never escape poverty. The math was simple and merciless. Even working constantly, even sacrificing everything, she was drowning in slow motion. Adwen would need more surgeries. The girls would need clothes, school supplies, opportunities. And she was 1 sick day away from catastrophe, 1 missed shift from eviction. He could fix this with what amounted to pocket change for him. But he understood, sitting in his car watching their window, that money was just another form of abandonment. Writing checks wasn't fatherhood. Financial support wasn't love. His phone contained the photo from the newsletter, and he found himself opening it obsessively, zooming in on each face, trying to read their personalities in pixels. Gwen looked serious, already carrying weight meant for adults. Ellen was smiling, but her hand was on Adwen's shoulder, protective. Adwen, smallest and clearly fragile, had a grin that suggested she didn't know she was supposed to be broken. 2 years. 2 years of their lives erased by his cowardice. 2 years of first words, first steps, first laughs, first tears, first everything, and he'd missed it all by choice. Not by circumstance or fate or tragedy, but by choice. The freedom he'd purchased with their absence tasted like poison now. His penthouse felt like a morgue. His company, built on the premise that success required sacrifice, now seemed like a monument to wrong priorities. He'd traded 3 hearts for stock options, 3 souls for solitude, 3 daughters for the right to remain broken rather than try to heal. He followed them for a week, learning their routines from a distance. The daycare drop-off at 6:30 a.m., Stella running because the bus was late. The playground visits where Gwen organized games while Helen mediated disputes, and Adwin watched from the stroller, too weak to play but clapping for her sisters. The grocery shopping with coupons and calculations, generic brands and apologies to the girls for things they couldn't afford. One evening, he watched them through the diner window as Stella worked. A customer had given the girls coloring books, and they sat in a corner booth, Gwen helping Adwin hold the crayons correctly, Helen humming while she colored. They were perfect. Not perfect in the way he'd imagined children should be. Quiet, controlled, convenient. Perfect in their chaos, their noise, their existence. He thought about walking in, about approaching them, about saying, "What? I'm your father, but I chose fear over love. I abandoned you before you were born, but now I've changed." There were no words for this magnitude of failure, no apology that could span the crater he'd created. Instead, he sat in his car and watched them color, watched Stella steal glances at them between orders, watched a family exist without him, exactly as he'd orchestrated. They didn't need him. They'd survived his absence, had built something beautiful despite his cruelty. He was unnecessary, had made himself redundant through his own choices. But knowing that and accepting it were different things. Because now that he'd seen them, now that their faces were burned into his retinas, now that he knew their names and their struggles and their triumphs, he couldn't return to ignorance. The freedom he'd chosen was just another prison, except in this one, he was haunted by 3 ghosts who were still alive, still breathing. Still wondering why Daddy loved them from so far away, when the truth was, Daddy hadn't loved them at all until it was too late. Gwen, Helen, Adwin. Their names became his rosary, his punishment, his prayer. Somewhere in Queens, in an apartment with thin walls and uncertain heat, 3 pieces of his soul were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their father had finally discovered what he'd lost, the moment he'd chosen freedom over their lives. And now that freedom felt like drowning in open air, like dying of thirst while watching rain through glass, like being offered heaven and choosing hell because heaven required him to change, and he'd been too afraid to try. Chapter 4. The First Failed Attempt. The lunch rush at Murphy's Diner hit like a storm every weekday at noon, and Stella had learned to surf its chaos with practiced grace. She was pouring coffee for table 6, calculating tips in her head to figure out if she could afford Adwin's new prescription when the bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up, couldn't afford to break rhythm when every second counted toward another dollar. Stella. Her hand froze mid-pour. Coffee overflowed the cup, spreading across the saucer and onto the checkered tablecloth as her mind struggled to process the impossible. That voice, speaking her name in this place where she had rebuilt herself from ashes, felt like violence. She turned slowly, still holding the pot. And there he stood, Dewald Freeman in his $3,000 suit, looking like he had been teleported from another dimension into the fluorescent reality of Murphy's Diner. Every conversation in the place stopped. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause, as if the universe itself needed to acknowledge this collision of worlds. "You need to leave," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. She set down the coffee pot with careful precision, afraid that if she moved too quickly, she might shatter. 5 minutes, please, that's all I'm asking." He stood in the aisle between booths, his hands at his sides like a penitent, but she knew better than to trust his postures of humility. She had seen him practice sincerity in mirrors before important meetings, had watched him calibrate his expression for maximum impact. "Table 6 needs their check," she said to Miranda, who was staring with unabashed fascination. Then to Dewald, "Outside. You're disrupting my workplace." The December air bit through her polyester uniform as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She didn't bother with her coat. This conversation wouldn't last long enough to matter. He followed her to the narrow alley beside the diner, where dumpsters provided a fitting backdrop for what she had to say. "How dare you?" she began. But he interrupted, pulling out an envelope from his jacket. "I know about the girls, about Adwen's surgeries, about everything." His voice cracked on everything, and she might have believed it was genuine if she hadn't spent 3 years learning the difference between performance and truth. "This is a bank draft. Enough to cover all medical expenses past and future. Enough for a house, education, everything they need." The envelope trembled in his extended hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Everything they need? They needed a father to hold them when they were born, 3 months premature. They needed someone beside me when the doctor explained that Adwen might not survive her first surgery. They needed another pair of hands during the months of colic when I didn't sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. Money? Money is what you offer now? I know I failed them. Failed you. But I can fix this. Fix this?" She stepped closer, close enough to smell his cologne, that expensive scent that used to mean safety and now meant betrayal. "Gwen asked me last week why some kids have daddies and she doesn't. Helen draws pictures of our family with an empty space she doesn't know how to fill. Adwen has spent more time in hospitals than playgrounds, and through all of it, every single second, you were absent by choice." I was wrong. I see that now. The company, the success, none of it matters without what? Without the family you threw away like garbage? You called them a burden before they were even born. You changed your locks while I was still carrying them. You sent security to watch me pack my things, like I was a thief trying to steal something from you, when all I had ever stolen was the foolish belief that you loved me. A customer pushed past them to reach the dumpster, forcing them to step aside. The mundane interruption highlighted the absurdity of his presence here, in her world of minimum wage and borrowed time. "Let me provide for them," he said when they were alone again. "You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to see me. But let me give them what they deserve. What they deserve." She pulled out her phone, showing him the lock screen, a photo of the triplets at the park, their faces dirty with ice cream she had saved for weeks to buy. "They deserve this. Love that doesn't keep score. Presence that doesn't require a profit margin. They deserve bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better and someone who shows up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I want to be that person. I want to learn. You want?" The fury that had been simmering for 2 years finally boiled over. "You wanted freedom, remember? You wanted your glass tower and your board meetings and your Fortune 500 glory. You got exactly what you wanted, Dewald. And we learned to live without wanting you." He reached for her hand, but she jerked away as if his touch might burn. "Don't. You don't get to touch me. You don't get to stand here in your suit that costs more than I make in 3 months and pretend that money can resurrect what you killed." "Then what can I do? Tell me what I can do." "You can leave. You can go back to your penthouse and your empty life and your freedom that you valued more than 3 heartbeats. You can live with the knowledge that somewhere in this city, 3 pieces of you exist in the world, and they are extraordinary despite your absence. They are kind and brave and full of joy, not because of you, but in spite of you. Stella, please. My shift isn't over, and like you, I can't afford to walk away from responsibilities." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Do you know what Adwen's first word was?" "Mama." She said it in the ICU, hooked up to machines that were keeping her alive. Helen's was light, because she's always been drawn to brightness. Gwen's was no, because she came into this world fighting and hasn't stopped. You missed all of it. And you earned that absence with every choice you made. She reached for the door handle, but his words stopped her. I dream about them. She didn't turn around. No, you dream about the idea of them. You dream about some fantasy where you can write a check and suddenly become the father you refuse to be. But fatherhood isn't a hostile takeover, Dewald. You can't acquire it like a company. You can't negotiate terms and conditions. You either show up from the beginning or you live with the emptiness you created. You're punishing them for my mistakes. Now she did turn, and the look in her eyes made him step back. I'm protecting them from your inevitable abandonment, because that's who you are, isn't it? When things get difficult, when the crying won't stop, when the medical bills pile up, when parent-teacher conferences conflict with board meetings, you'll leave again. You'll find reasons why the company needs you more, why distance is better for everyone, why freedom matters more than family. I've changed. No, you've been caught. There's a difference. You saw a photo and felt guilty, but guilt isn't love, Dewald. Guilt doesn't sit up all night with a fevering child. Guilt doesn't make Halloween costumes from scratch because buying them isn't in the budget. Guilt doesn't sing the same lullaby 47 times because it's the only thing that helps them sleep. The lunch rush was ending, and she was losing money with every minute she stood in this alley. But she needed him to understand. Do you know why I tell them you love them from far away? Not for you, for them. So they don't grow up thinking they're unlovable. So they don't spend their lives wondering what defect made their father leave. I lied to protect their hearts from the truth that you looked at the miracle of 3 lives and saw only inconvenience. Tears were running down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. Let him see what his reappearance cost her. Let him understand that his presence was violence against the peace she had fought to build. I will earn their love, he said quietly, however long it takes. Love isn't earned, Dewald. Love is given freely or not at all. And you gave nothing. You offered money like a transaction, safety like a contract, presence like a hostile takeover. But love was the one thing you couldn't bear to give. And it was the only thing they needed. She left him standing in the alley beside the dumpsters, returning to her shift, to her customers who tipped in quarters and dollars, to her world where she was not the woman who had been abandoned, but the mother who had survived. Through the window she could see him still standing there, the envelope in his hand, a man worth billions who couldn't purchase the one thing he had thrown away. Miranda didn't ask questions when Stella's hands shook too badly to pour coffee. The cook didn't comment when she had to excuse herself to cry in the walk-in freezer. And when her shift ended, when she rushed to collect her daughters from daycare, she held them extra tight, breathed in their sweet chaos, and promised them silently that she would keep building walls between them, and the man who had proven that blood alone didn't make a father. That night, after bedtime stories and prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening, she sat at her small table and counted tips. $63.47. Not enough for the prescription, but maybe enough for the generic if she could convince the pharmacist to split the dose. She didn't think about the envelope Dewald had offered, didn't calculate how many problems it would solve. Some prices were too high to pay, and her daughter's emotional safety was worth more than any check he could write. Chapter 5. The Persistence. The flowers started arriving on a Tuesday in January, 3 months after his first attempt at the diner. Not roses, that would have been too obvious, but sweet peas, the flower she had carried at a wedding they'd attended together 4 years ago, when she'd whispered to him that they meant goodbye. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her as she signed for them at the daycare center where she'd had them redirected. Knowing they couldn't be delivered to the diner or the apartment without causing questions, she couldn't answer. "Secret admirer?" asked Janet, the daycare director, eyeing the expensive arrangement. "Something like that," Stella murmured, reading the card. "For every goodbye, I'm sorry. For every hello I missed, I'm sorrier. D." She left them in Janet's office, saying anyone who wanted them could have them. But the next day brought another delivery, this time 3 small bouquets of daisies, Gwen, Helen and Adwin's birth flowers, a detail he had somehow discovered. The day after that, forget-me-nots. Then bachelor's buttons, which meant hope. Each card carried a message more desperate than the last, his usual eloquence fracturing under the weight of sustained rejection. "Take them to the children's ward," she told Janet after the 5th day. "The kids there deserve something beautiful." But Duwald's campaign wasn't limited to flowers. Letters began arriving at her apartment. Expensive stationery slipped under the door because he had somehow discovered that she threw away anything that came through the mail with his return address. She found them when she came home from double shifts. Cream-colored envelopes that seemed to glow against the dingy hallway carpet. She burned the first 3 unopened in the sink, watching his handwriting curl and blacken. But the 4th one had different writing on the envelope, shaky, childlike letters spelling out "For the brave girl's mama." Inside, she found a note in Duwald's hand explaining that he had been teaching himself to write with his left hand, practicing for hours to create something that looked like a child's writing, imagining what it would be like if his daughters could write to her. "I know they can't write yet," the letter said, "but if they could, I think they would want their mama to know that someone thinks she's the strongest person in the world, even if that someone doesn't deserve to say it." She kept that one, hidden in the shoebox where she stored the girls' hospital bracelets and first locks of hair. A moment of weakness she would regret later, but at 2 a.m. after a 16-hour shift, her defenses were paper-thin. The letters evolved from apologies to something else, observations of fatherhood from the outside. He wrote about seeing fathers at the park across from his office, how he found himself studying them like anthropological subjects, the way they caught their children at the bottom of slides, how they pretended to lose at races, the automatic way they checked for cars before crossing streets, hands reaching back without looking to grasp smaller fingers. "I stood outside a toy store for 3 hours yesterday," one letter confessed, "watching parents shop with their children. There was a man with triplet boys, and I followed them through the store like a ghost. He knew exactly what each child wanted, could predict their reactions to every toy. He said things like, 'Your brother wouldn't like that one. Remember how he feels about loud noises?' And this intimacy with their preferences, their fears, their joys, it's a language I never learned to speak. I threw away my Rosetta Stone the night I threw you away." February brought a shift in tactics. The letters stopped, the flowers ceased, and for 2 weeks she heard nothing. The silence should have been relief, but instead it felt like the held breath before a storm. She found herself checking corners, expecting to see him, but he had vanished as completely as he had appeared. Then she understood. The trust fund notifications started arriving at the daycare, anonymous donations to cover the girls' tuition for the next 5 years. A mysterious benefactor had paid off the center's mortgage with the stipulation that 20% of spots be reserved for single-parent families. New playground equipment appeared overnight, with a plaque reading, "For all the brave children who play with joy, despite life's challenges." "We know it's connected to you somehow," Janet said carefully. "The timing is too coincidental, but whoever this benefactor is, they've changed everything for us. We can hire more staff, extend hours for parents who work nights. We can provide meals for children who need them." Stella wanted to be angry, but how could she rage against something that helped not just her children but dozens of others? This was Duwald's specialty, finding the pressure points, the places where resistance became selfishness. He was treating her like a hostile takeover, looking for weaknesses in her defensive position. She found him one evening in March, sitting in his Bentley outside the hospital where Adwin had her monthly checkup. The car was covered in parking tickets, suggesting he'd been there all day. He didn't approach, didn't roll down his window, just sat there like a lighthouse keeper maintaining his vigil. "Why?" she asked, walking over after settling the girls in her beat-up Honda. "Why the persistence? You got what you wanted, freedom. Why can't you leave us with the same? He looked terrible. The godlike CEO was gone, replaced by someone hollow-eyed and haunted. His usually perfect appearance was crumbling at the edges, tie askew, stubble breaking through, hair uncombed. Because freedom is just another word for loneliness when you've thrown away the only things worth being bound to. Pretty words don't change ugly actions. I know, but I can't stop trying. Do you understand what it's like to know they exist? To know that right now, at this moment, they're in that car, and I don't know if Gwen still sucks her thumb when she's tired, or if Helen is afraid of the dark, or what Adwin's laugh sounds like. I'm haunted by curiosities that should be certainties. Those are consequences, not injustices. He nodded, accepting the verdict. I hired someone to teach me about child development. I've read every book on triplets, on heart conditions, on single parenting. I know theoretically that they're probably entering the defiant threes, that Adwen needs to avoid respiratory infections, that Helen is likely the peacemaker, while Gwen is the protector. But theory isn't knowledge, is it? It's just elaborate guessing. A parking enforcement officer approached, and Dewald handed over his license without looking, accepting another ticket to add to his collection. The absurdity of it, a billionaire accumulating parking tickets like prayers, each one a record of hours spent hoping for glimpses of children he'd abandoned, might have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. The private investigator told me you sing to them every night, he said suddenly. The same song your mother sang to you. Somewhere over the rainbow. I've played every version ever recorded. Trying to imagine your voice weaving through the melody, trying to picture them falling asleep to something I'll never be part of. Stop investigating us. I did, months ago. That was from the first report, the only one I kept. I memorized it, actually. Every detail. How Gwen organizes her stuffed animals by size. How Helen insists on wearing mismatched socks. How Adwen has to sleep with her head elevated. I know these fragments, these snapshot facts, but not the living truth of them. Stella looked back at her car, where 3 car seats held 3 futures that didn't include him. Knowledge isn't love, Dewald. You're trying to study your way into fatherhood like it's a merger you can master with enough research. Then teach me. Let me learn properly. Supervised visits. Any conditions you set. Let me prove I can be consistent. Consistent. You've been persistent for 3 months. Consistency is 3 years of showing up whether you feel like it or not. It's a lifetime commitment you've already proven you can't make. He pulled out a folder from his passenger seat, thick with documents. I've restructured everything. The company runs itself now. I've stepped back from day-to-day operations. I've cleared my schedule indefinitely. I can be whatever they need, whenever they need it. You restructured your company for them, but couldn't restructure your heart when they were conceived. The question hung between them like a blade. He had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse, and she was tired of his words anyway. They were just noise, vibrations in air that couldn't undo the silence of their first 2 years. I'm taking them home now, she said, turning away. They're home, where they're safe and loved, and don't need to wonder why Daddy only loves them from a distance. Don't follow us. Don't wait outside anymore. Don't make me get a restraining order, because I will if I have to. Stella, please, do you know what the worst part is? She paused at her car door. If you had shown even a fraction of this interest when I told you I was pregnant, we could have been a family. All this energy you're pouring into stalking us, into guilt and flowers and anonymous donations. If you had given us even 10% of that then, those girls would know their father. But you didn't. You looked at the miracle of 3 lives and saw only inconvenience. And now you look at the inconvenience of their absence and see only miracles. That's not growth, Dewald. That's regret dressed up as revelation. She drove away, watching in her rearview mirror as he stood in the parking lot, holding his folder of reformed promises, looking like a man who had just realized that some bridges, once burned, leave gaps too wide for any amount of money or persistence to cross. In the back seat, Gwen was teaching Helen a counting song while Adwin hummed along. off-key but enthusiastic. They didn't know their father was disappearing behind them, didn't know he existed at all, except as a concept Stella had crafted from careful lies and desperate love. That night, after baths and stories and kisses that had to be distributed equally among 3 foreheads, she sat at her kitchen table and finally read all his letters. Page after page of remorse, of recognition, of a man dissecting his own failure with surgical precision. But nowhere in all those words did she find the answer to the only question that mattered. How could she trust someone who had already proven that his love was conditional, that freedom mattered more than family, that 3 heartbeats weren't enough to anchor him when the wind of ambition blew? She burned them all, watching his words turn to smoke that dissipated through her small window. But she kept the one written in shaky left-handed letters, the one that pretended to be from daughters who couldn't yet write. Because someday maybe they would ask about him, and she would need evidence that he had tried, even if trying wasn't enough to earn him entrance into their carefully guarded world. Chapter 6. The Broken Man. The grocery store encounter happened on an ordinary Saturday in April, when spring was trying to push through winter's last grip. Stella had timed their shopping perfectly. 8 a.m., when the store was quiet and the girls were still drowsy enough to be manageable. She was comparing prices on cereal, calculating whether the store brand would save enough to justify the inevitable complaints, when Helen's piping voice cut through her concentration. "Mama, that man is crying." Stella looked up from the boxes to follow her daughter's pointing finger, and her blood turned to ice water. Dewald stood frozen at the end of the aisle. His shopping basket dropped at his feet, oranges rolling across the linoleum like small suns scattering. His face was a study in devastation, tears streaming unchecked as he stared at the 3 girls clustered around Stella's cart. For a moment, nobody moved. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Music played something innocuous, and Dewald Freeman, Billionaire CEO, stood in the cereal aisle of a suburban grocery store, completely undone by his first real sight of his daughters. "Why is he sad, Mama?" Gwen asked, her protective instincts already stirring. She moved closer to the cart where Adwen sat in the child seat, automatically shielding her smallest sister. Stella's mind raced through possibilities. Run, make a scene, pretend he was a stranger? But the girls were watching, learning from her every reaction, and she couldn't teach them cruelty even towards someone who deserved it. "Sometimes people have big feelings," she said carefully, pulling the cart backward, trying to create distance. But Helen, sweet, empathetic Helen, had already picked up one of the runaway oranges. "Don't be sad, mister," she said, walking toward him with the orange extended like an offering. "You can have this. Oranges make people happy because they're sunny." Dewald dropped to his knees, right there on the dirty grocery store floor, his designer suit be damned. He accepted the orange from Helen with shaking hands, holding it like she'd given him the moon itself. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice broken glass. "That's very kind." "Helen, come back here," Stella commanded, but her voice wavered, because Dewald wasn't looking at Helen anymore. He was staring at Adwen, at the surgical scar visible above her collar, at her thin frame that spoke of ongoing health struggles. "She's so small," he breathed, more to himself than anyone. "I didn't know she would be so small." "We're going," Stella announced, abandoning her half-full cart. But as she turned, Gwen stepped forward, her chin lifted in a gesture so purely Dewald that Stella's heart cracked. "Our daddy loves us from far away," Gwen informed him solemnly. "He does important work. Mama says he thinks about us all the time." The sound Dewald made wasn't quite sob, wasn't quite laugh, but something torn from depths that sophisticated people weren't supposed to have. "I'm sure he does," he managed. "I'm sure he thinks about you every second of every day." An elderly woman turned into the aisle, took in the scene, a well-dressed man on his knees, crying before three small children and their defensive mother, and quickly reversed course. The moment stretched, suspended in the artificial atmosphere of processed air and piped-in music. "Are you sick?" Adwen asked suddenly, her voice smaller than her sister's, marked by too many hospital stays. "When I'm sick, I cry sometimes. It's okay. Mama says tears help wash the hurt out." "Yes," Dewalt said, looking directly at Stella now. "I'm very sick. I've been sick for a long time. I threw away my medicine before I knew I needed it." "That's silly," Helen laughed. "You should always take your medicine. I take mine even when it tastes yucky." "You're very wise." He was still on his knees, making no move to stand, as if he understood that rising to his full height might break whatever spell allowed this moment to exist. "All three of you are very wise. We're triplets," Gwen announced proudly. "That means we were born together. We're a team." "The best team," he agreed, and his voice broke completely on best. Stella found her voice finally, found the strength that had carried her through 2 years of his absence. "Girls, go pick out one treat each. The small bags only. I'll be right there." They scampered off toward the candy aisle, Gwen herding her sisters with practiced authority. Once they were out of earshot, Stella rounded on Dewald, who was slowly pulling himself to his feet. "How dare you ambush us like this? I didn't know you'd be here. I swear, I needed groceries. I've been living on takeout for months. My housekeeper quit. I've been falling apart, Stella, piece by piece, and I thought maybe if I could just do something normal, something human like buying food." She looked at him then, really looked at him. His suit, expensive as it was, hung loose on a frame that had shed pounds. His hands trembled constantly, a fine shivers-like withdrawal. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow, surrounded by skin that looked bruised with exhaustion. "You look terrible," she said, the words automatic, tinged with a concern she didn't want to feel. "I haven't been sleeping. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. Imaginary versions of them. I dream about first steps I didn't witness, first words I didn't hear. I wake up and for a second I forget that I chose to miss it all. And then I remember and it's like that night all over again, except now I'm the one being abandoned by ghosts of children I refuse to know. That's not my problem. I know. God, I know. But seeing them, Stella, they're perfect. Helen with her kindness, Gwen with her strength, Adwen with her courage. They're everything beautiful despite my ugliness. How did you do that? How did you raise 3 miracles alone? Because I had to. Because they deserved better than a father who saw them as burdens before they were even born." He bent to gather the scattered oranges, movements mechanical and lost. "I've destroyed my life, you know. The company runs without me. The penthouse echoes. I bought 3 of everything, beds, toys, clothes in every size, because I don't know what they wear. The rooms sit there like a museum to children who will never use them. You're asking me to feel sorry for you? No, I'm telling you that justice exists, that the universe has delivered exactly what I deserve, the knowledge of what I threw away, combined with the impossibility of getting it back. I'm haunted, Stella. Not by ghosts, but by the living, breathing reality of 3 daughters who don't know my name." The girls returned, each clutching their chosen candy. Gwen had picked gummy bears, Helen had chocolate, and Gwen, practical even in treats, had chosen trail mix. They looked between their mother and the strange man, sensing tension but not understanding its source. "We should go," Stella said, lifting Adwen into her arms. The child was 4, but weighed less than most 2-year-olds, her heart condition affecting her growth. Dewald's eyes tracked the movement, noting how easily Stella lifted her, how Adwen's arms wrapped around her mother's neck with practiced ease. Could I at least pay for their candy?" he asked, the question desperate and small. "We don't need—" "Please." "Not for you. Not even for them. For me. Let me buy my daughter's candy, just once. Let me do one thing, one tiny thing, that fathers do." The word daughters hung in the air like a confession. The girls didn't understand its significance, but Stella felt its weight. This admission, this claim he had no right to make, should have angered her. Instead, she found herself exhausted by the constant vigilance required to hate him. "Fine," she said quietly, "but we're leaving. Don't follow us." At the checkout, he paid for their candy and the groceries she'd abandoned, despite her protests. The cashier, a teenager with no context for the drama unfolding, cheerfully asked if they were all together. "No," Stella said. At the same time, Dewald said, "We used to be." As she loaded the girls into their car seats, she could see him through the store windows, standing at his expensive car, holding those oranges like holy relics. He looked broken in a way that transcended physical exhaustion, broken in the spaces where a soul was supposed to be. That man was really sad, Helen observed as they drove away. "Sometimes people make choices that break their own hearts," Stella told her, watching Dewald shrink in her rearview mirror. "That's silly," Gwen declared. "Why would anyone choose to be sad?" "I don't know, baby." "I really don't know." That night, after the girls were asleep, she stood in their doorway, watching them breathe. 3 small bodies in 3 small beds, existing in defiance of their father's rejection. She thought about Dewald, probably sitting in his empty penthouse surrounded by unused children's furniture, drowning in regret that couldn't resurrect the past. Was this justice? Watching him deteriorate while she struggled but survived. Was his suffering payment for their abandonment? She didn't know. All she knew was that seeing him on his knees in a grocery store, undone by Helen's simple kindness, had shifted something in her chest. Not forgiveness, that was still impossible, but maybe possibly the first crack in her armor of absolute rejection. She checked on Adwin one more time, adjusting her positioning to help her breathe easier, and wondered if a father's love, even delayed, even undeserved, might be medicine her smallest daughter needed. But then she remembered that night in November, the sound of locks changing, the weight of carrying 3 lives alone, and she hardened her heart again. Some medicines, she decided, came at too high a price, even if the patient was dying without them. Chapter 7. The Public Humiliation. The daycare spring festival sprawled across Riverside Park on a perfect May afternoon, complete with face painting, pony rides, and the controlled chaos of hundreds of small children high on cotton candy and freedom. Stella had volunteered for the bake sale table, selling cupcakes she'd made at 3 a.m. after her double shift, because being involved in the girls' activities mattered more than sleep. She was making change for a 20 when she saw him. Dewald stood at the entrance to the festival, holding 3 gift bags and wearing jeans. She'd never seen him in jeans in 4 years of knowing him. He looked like he was trying to cosplay normalcy, but his designer t-shirt and $1,000 sneakers betrayed him. He was scanning the crowd, and she knew the moment he spotted them, because his entire body oriented toward her daughters, like a compass finding north. "No," she breathed. But he was already walking over, drawn by the sight of Gwen helping Adwin on the bunny hop game, while Helen cheered them on. "Stella." He stopped a respectful distance away, but close enough that other parents were starting to notice. "I know I shouldn't be here, but it's their first school festival. I just wanted to..." "To what?" Her voice was rising despite her intentions. "To play daddy for an afternoon? To hand out presents and disappear again? That's not..." "Mama, who's that?" Gwen had noticed the disturbance, was already moving to protect her sisters, herding them behind her small body. The question sparked something in Stella, a fury that had been building for 2.5 years. The other parents were watching now, the bake sale forgotten, and she found she didn't care. Let them witness this. Let them understand what kind of man could abandon 3 babies. "Nobody," she said loudly. "He's nobody. Just a man who thinks he can buy his way into lives he threw away. Stella, please, not here." "Not here? Not here?" She was fully yelling now, and the entire festival had gone quiet, except for the tinny carousel music that suddenly seemed obscene. "You want to talk about appropriate places? How about the delivery room where I pushed out 3 babies alone?" How about the NICU where I signed surgical consent forms with no one to hold my hand? How about the food bank where I swallowed my pride to feed your daughters? I'm sorry. Sorry? She laughed, wild and bitter. Do you know what Adwin's first surgery cost? $43,000. Do you know what the second cost? $67,000. Do you know how many payment plans I'm on? How many collectors call me daily? How many times I've had to choose between keeping the lights on and buying medication? Janet, the daycare director, was approaching, concern written across her face, but Stella was beyond stopping. The dam had broken, and 2.5 years of suppressed rage came flooding out in front of everyone. You stand there with gift bags, like this is a birthday party you're late to. But where were you for their actual birthdays? The first one, when I made a cake from a box mix and cried because I couldn't afford candles. The second one, spent in the hospital because Adwin's heart couldn't handle the excitement. I didn't know, because you chose not to know. Her voice cracked across the festival like a whip. You changed your locks before they were even born. You called them a mistake, a burden, an inconvenience to your precious freedom. The gifts bags dropped from his hands, designer toys spilling onto the grass. He made no move to retrieve them. Parents were pulling their children away from the scene, but not too far. Everyone wanted to witness this tragedy, this public unraveling of whatever story they'd constructed about the single mother who worked at the diner. Do you know why Gwen is so protective? Stella continued, her voice raw but unstoppable. Because, at 4 years old, she's already learned that no one else will protect them. Do you know why Helen gives away her candy to kids who are sad? Because she's learned that kindness is all we have when money fails. Do you know why Adwin never complains, even when she can barely breathe? Because she's learned that Mama is too tired for complaints. Stop, he whispered, but she was beyond mercy. You want to know them now? Let me tell you who they are. They're warriors. They're survivors. They're miracles who exist despite your cruelty. Gwen can count to 100 because I taught her with dried beans while cooking dinner. Helen knows every free story time in the city because that's our entertainment. Adwin has spent more nights in hospitals than in her own bed. And through all of it, you were building your empire on the bones of their abandonment. She was crying now. Ugly sobs that she couldn't control, and the girls had pressed against her legs. Frightened by their mother's breakdown, Adwin was wheezing, stress triggering her breathing issues, and Stella dropped to her knees to tend to her, pulling out the inhaler with practiced efficiency. That's when Dewald broke completely. He fell to his knees in the middle of the festival, in full view of 100 strangers, and began to sob. Not the controlled tears of a man maintaining dignity, but the complete dissolution of someone whose soul was trying to escape through his throat. I'm sorry, he choked out, over and over, his body bowing until his forehead nearly touched the ground. I'm so sorry. I threw away heaven for hell. I'm sorry. The spectacle was complete. The billionaire CEO, the man whose face graced business magazines, was prostrate in a public park, begging forgiveness from children who didn't even know his name. Parents filmed on their phones. Children stared. The pony ride operator had stopped mid-circuit to gawk. Please, he gasped between sobs. Please let me fix this. Please let me try. I'll do anything, be anything, give up everything. Please don't let my stupidity define their lives, please. Their lives are already defined, Stella said, standing with Adwin in her arms, the child's breathing steadying. By my love, by my sacrifice, by my presence. You're just a footnote, Dewald. A cautionary tale about choosing ambition over family. She turned to Janet, who stood frozen with shock. We're leaving. Please donate our bake sale items to whoever needs them. As she walked away, leading her confused, frightened daughters, she heard him one more time, his voice carrying across the festival grounds. I love you, he screamed to their retreating backs. I love all 4 of you. I was too stupid and scared to know it then, but I know it now. I love you. But love, Stella thought as she buckled 3 car seats with shaking hands, wasn't a declaration screamed at a public festival. Love was staying when things got hard. Love was showing up at 3 a.m. when the fever wouldn't break. Love was choosing diapers over freedom, choosing presence over profit, choosing family over empire. The drive home was silent except for Helen's quiet sniffles and Gwen asking repeatedly if Mama was okay. Adwen had fallen asleep, exhausted from her breathing episode, her small hand clutching Stella's finger through the car seat straps. That evening, after the girls were in bed, after she'd answered their questions with careful half-truths about the sad man at the festival, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The scene had gone viral. Billionaire CEO's public breakdown was trending. Videos from every angle, comment sections dissecting their family drama for entertainment. She turned off her phone and sat in the darkness of her tiny apartment, listening to her daughters breathe, and wondered if public humiliation was enough punishment for private abandonment. Somewhere in his penthouse, DeWald was probably watching those same videos, seeing himself from the outside, understanding finally how small he looked when measured against the magnitude of what he'd lost. But understanding, she decided, wasn't the same as deserving forgiveness. Some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired with public tears or private regret. Some abandonments were absolute, no matter how spectacular the attempt at return. Chapter 8. The Daughter's Voice. The questions started 3 weeks after the festival incident, beginning with Gwen at breakfast on a mundane Tuesday morning. She was arranging her Cheerios in patterns, her face serious with 4-year-old concentration, when she looked up suddenly. "Mama!" The sad man at the festival had eyes like mine. Stella's hand stilled on the coffee pot. She'd been waiting for this, dreading it, knowing that Gwen's sharp intelligence would eventually connect dots that were better left scattered. "Lots of people have green eyes, baby, but his were exactly like mine." Ellen noticed too. She said he looked like us if we were old and sad. From the living room where Helen was coloring, a small voice piped up. "He gave me an orange that time at the store. He was nice, but very crying." Stella sat down carefully, trying to navigate this minefield of innocence and harsh truth. "Sometimes people recognize something special in you girls. It doesn't mean anything more than that." But Gwen wasn't satisfied. She inherited that from DeWald too, the inability to let things go once her curiosity was triggered. "Is he the one who sends the presents?" "What presents?" "The ones Janet puts in the donation box at daycare. They always have our names on them first, but then Janet crosses them out and writes, 'Donation.' I can still see our names underneath, though." Stella's heart sank. She'd thought they'd been discreet, but children saw everything, especially what adults tried to hide. "I don't know about any presents," she said, which was technically true. She'd instructed Janet to donate anything that arrived for the girls, unopened and unacknowledged. That afternoon, while Adwen napped and the older two played, Stella caught Helen drawing at their small table. The picture showed 4 figures, 3 small, 1 tall, all holding hands. But the tall figure was colored in black crayon, face obscured, a shadow person in their bright family portrait. "Who's that?" Stella asked, though she already knew. "The daddy from far away. I don't know what he looks like, so I made him from darkness. But he's holding our hands because you said he loves us, even if we can't see him." That night, as she tucked them in, Adwen spoke up in her whispery voice that always sounded like she was conserving air. "Mama, why doesn't our daddy come home? Is it because I'm sick?" The question was a knife between her ribs. "No, baby. Never think that. You're perfect exactly as you are. Then why? How did you explain abandonment to innocence? How did you translate adult selfishness into language that wouldn't scar small hearts? Sometimes grown-ups make choices they can't take back. It has nothing to do with you girls and everything to do with him." "Could we write him a letter?" Gwen asked. "Maybe if he knew we were good, he'd come. You are good. You're the best girls in the world. His absence isn't about your worth." But the questions persisted, evolving over the following days. Helen started asking every man at the park if he was anyone's daddy, conducting an informal survey of fatherhood. Gwen began cataloguing which classmates had fathers, creating elaborate theories about why some families had them and others didn't. Adwen, heartbreakingly, asked if daddies only came to healthy children, if maybe she needed to get better first. The breaking point came when Stella found them huddled together one evening. Gwen, reading from a piece of paper she'd laboriously written in her unpracticed hand. "Dear Daddy from far away," she read aloud. "We are good girls. Mama says you love us. We want to meet you. Helen will share her chocolate. Adwen will let you listen to her heartbeat with the special machine. I will teach you our bedtime song. Please come home. Love your daughters." Stella had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom, muffling her sobs with a towel while her daughters planned their impossible reunion. She found DeWald's car parked outside their building at midnight on Adwen's birthday. He was asleep in the driver's seat, the back filled with wrapped presents that would never be delivered. She could have left him there, but something, exhaustion, frustration, or perhaps the echo of her daughter's letter, made her tap on the window. He startled awake, immediately apologizing. "I'm not stalking, I swear. It's her birthday. I needed to be close, even if—" "They're asking about you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "They figured out you exist in some form. Gwen notices everything. Helen draws shadow fathers. Adwen thinks she's too sick for you to love." The sound he made was inhuman, pure anguish distilled into a breath. "She thinks, oh God, no. No, she's perfect. They're all perfect. How do I fix this? How do I tell them that their father is the one who's sick, not them?" "You don't, because telling them means admitting you chose to leave. Right now, they think you had to go. There's dignity in that fiction. The truth would destroy them. Then what do I do? I can't keep living like this, knowing they're wondering, possibly blaming themselves." Stella looked at this man who had once commanded boardrooms, who had built an empire on decisive action, now reduced to sleeping in cars and begging for wisdom about problems he'd created. Part of her, the part that had loved him once, felt a flicker of sympathy. But the mother in her, forged in the crucible of abandonment, remained stone. "You live with it. Like I lived with carrying them alone. Like I lived with Adwen's surgeries. Like I live with their questions I can't honestly answer. You live with the consequences of your choice. What if I could prove I've changed? Therapy, supervised visits that gradually increase, legal agreements that I can never leave again. You want me to gamble their hearts on your transformation, to risk them attaching to you, only for you to decide again that freedom matters more. I will never—" "You already did, once. That's the problem with never, DeWald. You already broke it." She left him there in his car, surrounded by birthday presents for a daughter he'd never met, and went back to her apartment, where 3 girls slept peacefully, dreaming of shadow fathers and letters that would never be sent. The next morning, she found a response slipped under her door, written in his distinctive handwriting, but addressed to the girls. "Dear brave girls, your mama is right that I love you from far away. I think about you every morning when the sun rises and every night when the stars come out. Gwen, I know you protect your sisters, and that makes you the strongest girl in the world. Helen, your kindness with the orange made my whole year brighter. Adwen, you are not too sick for love. You are so powerful that you fight battles every day that grown-ups couldn't handle. I stay away because I made mistakes that would hurt you to know about. But someday, when you're older, if your mama says it's okay, I hope to meet you properly. Until then, know that you are loved, you are wanted, and you are the best thing that ever happened to the world, even if the world doesn't know it yet. Love, someone who dreams of you always." She should have thrown it away, should have burned it like the others, but she found herself folding it carefully, placing it in the shoebox with their hospital bracelets. Maybe someday, when they were older, when the truth wouldn't shatter them, she would show them that their questions hadn't gone unheard, that their shadow father had been more real than they knew, just more broken than they could understand. That evening, as she sang them to sleep with "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," she thought about the letter hidden in her closet, about the man sleeping in his car outside, About three girls dreaming of a father they didn't know they'd already met. Life was messier than lullabies, more complicated than the stories she told them. But for now, for tonight, she would be enough. She would be everything, even if it was killing her to carry it all alone. Chapter 9. The Conditions. The park bench was neutral territory, Stella had decided. Not his penthouse where memories haunted every surface, not her apartment where her children's absence would be too present, but this bench in Prospect Park where she used to bring the girls as babies when their crying threatened eviction complaints. June sunshine filtered through leaves that had been bare branches when she'd last sat here in those desperate early days. Dewald was already there when she arrived, sitting with the careful posture of someone afraid that any sudden movement might spook a wild animal. He looked different, not better exactly, but steadier. The manic desperation that had driven him to public breakdown had been replaced by something quieter, more sustainable in its grief. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat at the opposite end of the bench, maximum distance between them. "The girls won't stop asking about you, about fathers in general. It's affecting them." She pulled out a folder thick with documentation. "So I've thought about it. Consulted lawyers, therapists, everyone I could find. Even this is an if bigger than your ego. We do this. There are conditions." "Anything." "Don't say that so quickly. These aren't negotiations. There's no compromise, no middle ground. You accept everything, or you get nothing." He nodded, hands clasped in his lap like a penitent in church. She opened the folder. First, therapy. Not executive coaching, not leadership counseling, but actual psychological therapy focused on abandonment, attachment disorders, and narcissistic tendencies. Twice a week minimum for 6 months before you even meet them properly. I've already started. Dr. Morrison, specialized in parental abandonment. 3 times a week. She blinked, surprised but not softened. Second, supervised visits only. Starting with 10 minutes once a week in a public space with me present. If you're 5 minutes late even once, it's over. If you cancel for anything short of hospitalization, it's over. If you make them a promise you don't keep, it's over. Understood. The supervision continues for a minimum of 1 year. After that, if the girls are comfortable and the therapist agrees, we can discuss gradual increases. But I will always have veto power. Always. Of course. She pulled out a legal document, pages of dense text. Third, you sign this. It states that you acknowledge your abandonment, that you have no inherent rights to these children, that any access is at my discretion. It also includes a clause that if you ever attempt to leave again, if you ever indicate that you're reconsidering your commitment, you forfeit any claim to them forever and owe punitive damages that would bankrupt even you. He reached for the pen immediately, but she pulled the document back. Fourth, financial support, but structured. Not a lump sum you can throw at us to ease your conscience, but consistent, documented support. College funds, medical trusts, monthly childcare contribution, all managed through a third party, so you can't use money as a weapon or a bargaining chip. I've already set up the trusts. Irrevocable. They're protected no matter what happens between us. Fifth, her voice hardened, you never, ever tell them the truth about that night. As far as they know, you had to leave for reasons beyond your control. If they ever learn that you chose to abandon them, it comes from me, when I decide they're ready, in my words. They should hate me, not you. This isn't about protecting you. It's about protecting them from the knowledge that their father looked at their existence and chose freedom. That's a wound that might never heal, and I won't inflict it unless absolutely necessary. She pulled out photographs, 3 school pictures from the daycare. Sixth, you learn them. Not through investigators or reports, but through observation and interaction. You learn that Gwen hates loud noises because they remind her of hospitals. That Helen needs to check 3 times that doors are locked because she's afraid of being left. That Adwin requires specific positioning when she sleeps and her lips turn blue when she's overexerted. He traced their faces in the photos with a trembling finger. They're beautiful. They're work. Hard, constant, exhausting work. They're not photo opportunities or success stories to share at cocktail parties. They're three individuals with trauma from medical procedures, abandonment issues they can't articulate, and needs that won't conform to your schedule. I know. No, you don't, but you might learn. She pulled out another document. 7th parallel lives for now. You don't get to confuse them by suddenly appearing as daddy. You're introduced as mama's friend who wants to get to know them, only when they're comfortable, only when the therapist agrees, only when I'm certain you won't destroy them, do we discuss transitioning to the truth. How long? As long as it takes. Maybe a year, maybe 5. Maybe they're teenagers before they know. This isn't about your timeline or your need for resolution. It's about their emotional safety. He was crying silently, tears dropping onto his expensive pants, but he kept nodding. What else? 8th, no undermining my parenting. No expensive gifts that make my efforts look shabby. No contradicting my rules. No being the fun parent who swoops in with treats while I'm the one enforcing bedtime. You want to be their father? Then be a father, not a Santa Claus trying to buy affection. Agreed. 9th, you attend every medical appointment for Adwen. Not to take over, but to understand. To see what she goes through, what we go through. To understand that her heart condition isn't just a line item in a medical report, but a daily reality that affects every decision. I want to be there. She laughed bitterly. Want, you keep saying want. This isn't about what you want anymore. It's about what they need. And what they need is stability, consistency, and the absolute certainty that they won't be abandoned again. How do I prove that? You don't. You just show up over and over and over until showing up becomes as natural as breathing, until the thought of leaving becomes as impossible as stopping your own heart, until you understand that freedom without them isn't freedom at all. She stood, gathering her documents. Take a week to think about it. Really think. Because once you sign these papers, once you meet them as someone who intends to stay, there's no backing out. No changing your mind when it gets hard. No deciding that board meetings matter more than ballet recitals. No choosing the company over them ever again. I don't need a week. Take it anyway. Because I need you to be certain. They've already survived your abandonment once. They won't survive it twice. She started to leave, then turned back. Do you know what Gwen asked me last night? She asked if daddies who love from far away ever love from close up. I didn't know how to answer her. What did you say? I said sometimes love needs time to find its way home. But I was lying, Duald, because your love didn't get lost. You threw it away. And now you want me to gamble their hearts on the possibility that you've finally drawn a map back to feelings you should never have abandoned. She left him on the bench with the photographs. The man who commanded empires reduced to begging for 10 supervised minutes with children he'd declared worthless. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the park, and she thought about time, how it could heal, but also how it could hurt. How 2.5 years could feel like forever to a child, wondering why Daddy loved from so far away. That night, she watched her daughters sleep and tried to imagine him in their lives. Not the him from before, the man who'd changed locks and signed checks like surgical amputations, but this new version, hollowed out by loss and filled with desperate need to repair the irreparable. Could she trust him with their hearts? Could she risk their stable, if difficult existence, for the possibility of a complete family? Gwen shifted in her sleep, murmuring something about shadows. Helen clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. Adwen's breathing wheezed slightly, a sound that still made Stella's heart skip, even though the doctors said it was normal for her condition. These were her daughters, hers alone for 2.5 years. She'd earned them through blood and tears and nights that never ended. But maybe, possibly, they deserved the chance to know the man who'd finally understood that freedom meant nothing if it came at the price of their absence. Maybe. But first, he would prove it, 10 minutes at a time, one showing up at a time, one kept promise at a time. And if he failed, even once, She would protect them the way she always had, absolutely fiercely, and alone. Chapter 10. The Long Road Home. 6 months of Sundays had passed, each one marked by 10 minutes in the park that gradually became 15, then 30, then an hour. Dewald had never missed one, not through blizzards or board crises or the pneumonia that had him showing up with a mask and a doctor's note. The girls knew him now as Mr. D, Mama's friend, who always appeared at the playground with the uncanny ability to know exactly what would make them smile. Today was different. Today, they were in the waiting room at Mount Sinai, and Adwen was being prepped for what the doctors promised would be her final surgery. The walls were painted with cheerful murals that couldn't quite mask the antiseptic smell of medical possibility and peril. "Mr. D, are you scared?" Ellen asked, noticing his trembling hands. Terrified, he admitted, this man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. "But brave people do things even when they're scared, right?" "That's what Mama says," Gwen confirmed, arranging the waiting room toys in order of size, her way of controlling chaos. "She says Adwen is the bravest because she does scary things all the time." Stella watched from across the room, saw how naturally they gravitated toward him now, how Helen climbed onto his lap without hesitation, how Gwen included him in her organizational systems. 6 months of consistency had built something she hadn't believed possible: trust. The surgeon appeared in the doorway. "We're ready for her." The walk to the operating room felt endless. Edwin, small in her hospital gown covered with cartoon bears, held both their hands, Stella's right, Dewald's left. She'd asked for him specifically, this child who measured her life in medical procedures. "You'll both be here when I wake up," she whispered. "Always," they said in unison, then looked at each other over her head. Surprised by their synchronicity, after they'd kissed her goodbye, after the anesthesia had taken her under and the surgeon had wheeled her away, they returned to the waiting room where Gwen and Helen were coloring with a volunteer. The girls rushed to them, and without discussion, they sat on opposite ends of a bench with the twins between them, a family arranged by proximity, if not yet by name. "Tell us the story about the princess with the special heart," Helen demanded. "Her way of processing anxiety," Stella began. The same story she'd told during every one of Adwen's procedures. But this time, when she got to the part about the kingdom waiting for the princess to heal, Dewald continued it. "The kingdom had been dark for a long time," he said quietly, "because the king had been foolish and sent away his greatest treasures, thinking his gold mattered more than his daughters." Gwen looked up sharply. She was too smart, had always been too smart. "That's not how the story goes. Sometimes stories change," Stella said carefully. "Sometimes they get better. Did the king come back?" Helen asked. "He's trying to," Dewald said. "Every day he tries to deserve the princesses he didn't know how to value." 6 hours. The surgery took 6 hours, during which they existed in that suspended space between before and after. They didn't speak much, but when Gwen fell asleep against his shoulder, Stella didn't move her. When Helen spread her coloring across both their laps, they held the paper steady together. Small acts of coordination, learning the rhythm of shared parenthood they should have known for years. Dr. Patterson finally appeared, exhausted but smiling. "She did beautifully. This should be the last one. Her heart is functioning normally. She'll need monitoring, medication for a while, but structurally she's repaired." The word repaired hung between them, meaning more than just Adwen's heart. Stella sobbed, the relief of 3 years of medical terror finally breaking through her control. Without thinking, Dewald pulled her against him, and she let him, too exhausted to maintain walls that had been crumbling for months anyway. "Mama's crying happy tears," Gwen informed Helen seriously. "That means Adwen is fixed. Does that mean she can run now?" Helen asked. "Let's ask her when she wakes up," Dewald said, his voice rough. They were allowed in to see her an hour later, still unconscious but stable. so small in the hospital bed, but her color was already better. The blue tinge that had always shadowed her lips was gone, replaced by pink that spoke of properly oxygenated blood. "She looks different," Gwen observed. "She looks healthy," Stella breathed. They stayed there all night, taking shifts in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. When Adwin woke at dawn, the first thing she saw was both of them, exactly as promised. Her smile, though weak, was radiant. "Hi, Mama. Hi, Mr. D. Did they fix my heart?" "Yes, baby. They fixed it." "Good. Now I can play tag." Such a simple wish, but it broke Dewald completely. He excused himself, and Stella could hear him sobbing in the hallway. The sound of a man understanding exactly what he'd nearly missed forever. 3 weeks later, after Adwin had come home, after she'd proven she could indeed play tag, though carefully, still building strength, Stella made a decision. They were at the park, their Sunday tradition, when she cleared her throat. "Girls, I need to tell you something about Mr. D." They gathered around, sensing importance. Dewald froze, not having expected this, not yet. "You know how we've always said your daddy loves you from far away?" 3 heads nodded solemnly. "Well, sometimes when people go far away, they realize they made a mistake. Sometimes they work very, very hard to come back. Mr. D is... He's our daddy," Gwen said simply. "I know. He has our eyes, and he cries whenever Adwin breathes good, and he knows our middle names without us telling him." Stella's careful speech died in her throat. "You knew?" "Suspected," Gwen corrected. Helen drew it first, though. Helen nodded, pulling out a crumpled picture from her pocket. It showed the same family of 4, but this time the tall figure had a face, green eyes prominent. "I've been practicing drawing him for when he came home." "Are you mad?" Dewald asked, his voice barely a whisper. The girls looked at each other in that triplet way they had, entire conversations in glances. "You left," Gwen said finally. "That was bad. But you came back. That's good. Mama says people make mistakes, but what matters is fixing them. I'm trying to fix them." "Trying counts," Helen decided. "But you have to keep trying forever." "Forever," he agreed immediately. Adwen, breathing easily for the first time in her life, walked over and climbed into his lap. "Does this mean you love us from close up now?" "The closest," he said, holding her like she might evaporate. "So close I can't breathe when you're not near." "That's silly," she giggled. "Breathing is important. I should know. They didn't move in together. They didn't rush to wedding bells or hasty attempts at normal. But slowly, carefully, they built something new. Dewald learned that bedtime took 2 hours and 17 stories. Stella learned that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. The girls learned that families could be broken and rebuilt, that love could leave and return, that hearts could be repaired in more ways than surgical. A year later, on the anniversary of Adwin's last surgery, they stood in the same hospital, but this time for a different reason. Dewald was legally adopting the girls, making official what had become true through presence rather than absence. The papers he signed were different from that check he'd written 3.5 years ago. These bound him, rather than severing, chose connection over freedom. "You know what this means?" the judge asked the girls. "This means he's your daddy forever, no matter what." "He already was," Gwen said matter-of-factly. "This is just paperwork." That night, in Stella's apartment that had witnessed so much struggle, they had a celebration with store-bought cake and juice boxes. The luxury wasn't in what they had, but in having it together. Dewald sat on the floor, 3 daughters climbing over him like a jungle gym, and understood that freedom hadn't been worth a single second of this chaos. "Tell us the story about when we were born," Helen requested. Stella and Dewald looked at each other across the sea of children and toys. There would be time for truth, for the full story when they were older. For now, there was a different truth to tell. "You were born during a storm," Stella began. "The biggest storm ever," Dewald added. "And the moment you arrived, all 3 of you, the sun came out." "That's meteorologically impossible," Gwen pointed out. But she was smiling. Love makes impossible things happen, Stella said, and for the first time in 3.5 years, she meant it. They fell asleep like that, all 5 of them in a pile on the living room floor. The daughters they'd almost lost between them, breathing easily, hearts repaired, family reformed. Outside, the city went about its business, unaware that in a small apartment in Queens, a man who had chosen freedom over diapers had finally come home to discover that the only real freedom was being completely, irrevocably bound to the people who mattered most.